Why don't we get started with a little bit of housekeeping while we are waiting for ASL folks, which is a little bit unkind in case if anybody is needing ASL, but why don't we get started for the sake of our time together. I'm Michael Munson, and I'm happy that everybody is here tonight. I'm really happy that both Nathan and Tony are here from the Equal Rights Commission, which is really a treat to have both of you here. I just wanted to do a little bit of housekeeping so that everybody that is not familiar with Zoom, I think most of us are by this day and age, that we do a little bit of tour of Zoom. We do have a cart captioner, so if you'd like to see captions, bottom of your screen, you should be able to click on the captioning button and get either subtitles or a full transcript on the side. And we will have ASL in a few minutes, so hopefully they will make their way in. And I wanted to make sure that we thank our funder. We are in partnership with the Medical College of Wisconsin's Inclusion Health Clinic and have a nice grant from the Advancing a Healthier Wisconsin Endowment through the Medical College. So we're doing mostly COVID-related things, but also making sure that our trans community stays supported and connected in this time that's very difficult for many of us. I know most of us know how to find the chat, but that is the way that we'll be interacting with folks today. So if folks can find the chat, could you type in the answer to the question of, like, we all care about our rights, our social rights, or our civil rights. What area of social justice are you most passionate about? So I'm seeing healthcare access, LGBT, all of them. And I'm hoping, so 70 seconds, all of them, ending all oppression, excellent. Employment rights, cool. So it looks like most of you have found the chat. So hopefully you will ask questions there and we will have some dialogue as we move forward. So I'm gonna turn things over to Shelley, who will be our lead for the night. And you can introduce our guests. Thanks, Shelley.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks, everyone, for being here tonight. We have the, I think, distinct privilege of being joined by two members of Milwaukee's Equal Rights Commission, Vice Chair of the Commission, Tony Snell Rodriguez, and Commissioner Nathan Guequierre as well. And I think what we'd like to do tonight is just have a conversation with both Nathan and Tony about the Equal Rights Commission in Milwaukee and about how it is a resource and provider of services for all of the various communities in Milwaukee, but particularly LGBTQ communities. And in particular, we'll talk about some of the really great work that the ERC has been doing over the last couple of years for trans, non-binary, and gender non-conforming members of Milwaukee's communities. So I'd love to start things off by just welcoming both Nathan and Tony. And I do see that we have the chair of the commission as well, Ches Ordonez, participating. So Ches, welcome and thanks for being here. Nathan and Tony, I'd love it if you could introduce yourselves and maybe share a little bit about who you are and what brought you to the city's Equal Rights Commission. And Nathan, you're unmuted, so why don't I throw that to you first?
Sure. I'm not an old timer like Tony, but I'm serving my first term on the Equal Rights Commission. I'm an urban planner by profession, and my work was mostly and is mostly centered around environmental justice, which is the inclusion of a certain class of protected populations in decision-making around major infrastructure investments. So I'm a transportation planner. I work on roads and bridges and transit systems. And my work through environmental justice led me into down a path of how to effectively engage people in communities that are traditionally having a hard time engaging with any kind of government any kind of government agencies, racial minorities, low-income populations, non-native speakers of English. And in my work in there sort of led to a lot of work with people with disabilities. So, and trying to understand how to incorporate the ADA into transportation decision-making sort of early on, which led me to eventually to the Equal Rights Commission. I got to know some of the folks at the city who work a lot with the ADA coordination there. And he said, hey, there's this opening on Equal Rights Commission, and I put my name in the hat. And so I've been on for a year and a half or maybe 2 years, and it's really been a wonderful and enlightening experience for me.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. I didn't know your history and some of the work that you do. And a little bit later on today, we'll be talking about the initiative the ERC has going right now on behalf of the city to bring gender-inclusive restrooms to the city of Milwaukee. And that's an effort that you've been leading very successfully and passionately.
Hopefully.
And I'm looking forward. Yeah, we'll talk about that more in a bit. Tony, would you be willing to share a little bit about yourself and who you are and what brought you to the commission?
Most certainly. And first of all, let me thank Forge for all the tremendous work that you do, and thank you, Shelley and Michael, and Shelley, all the valuable work you've done alongside the commission in providing us expertise and helping us drive things forward. Because and that's what I've learned, is that the commission is only as strong as its community and participation, and we rely heavily on individuals and organizations to help us drive positive and accessible and inclusive policies forward within the city. My background goes back over the years, as I began my days of coming out. When I came out, I began my days and years of advocacy for human rights and LGBTQ civil rights in South Carolina. There may be a little bit of an accent. And I did work there with the community center and with Pride, and as a lobbyist for the LGBTQ community in our capital down in South Carolina. And believe it or not, I did have some luck there. I got a hate crimes bill passed with that did include LGBTQ people by the South Carolina State Senate by 1 vote. But it didn't go any further than that. But that was a hallmark. And in Columbia, South Carolina, we got a human rights ordinance through. We're talking deep South here, but we got an ordinance through which was inclusive, which included gender identity and gender expression and sexual orientation. And despite the headwinds from our own community, which wanted to take a shortcut and leave the T out in order to move that piece of legislation forward quickly, and said it would get lost if we didn't. And I said no. I said hell no. And two of the co-authors of the human rights ordinance one was a Republican, one was a Democrat, and ultimately it took an extra 2 weeks, but we got it passed unanimously in a southern city. So don't tell me that we're going to leave people behind to be expeditious. Oh, we'll include it later. So I just bring that anecdotally because these frustrations go on and on and on, and it hasn't stopped today. And then we need to be whole, and we need to treat everyone empathetically. In driving policy, we need to make sure that it is truly inclusive, not just through our words, but through our deeds. And that's important, because when you begin to leave people out, you've really not done the work, and you're not doing the work. I'm just excited to continue this work here. I began as not a part of the commission, working with the mayor's office on the human rights municipal equality index score. When I got here from the South, we had a higher score down there than we did up here, and I wondered something had to be wrong. Obviously, we went to work, and we'll talk about that, I guess, a little bit later, and the exciting news of moving that forward. And then I had an opportunity to join the commission and continue this work. So I'm just excited to be here. I'm honored to be here with this with this this group and to have this discussion. I think it's vital, it's important, and I'm ready to not only participate as a speaker or panelist, but also to listen. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. I appreciate you sharing those your stories from the South. I think in many ways they are heartening to people like me who, like you, came to Wisconsin recently. I grew up here, moved away to California, and it's a very different environment. Coming back to Wisconsin and seeing some of the political challenges that we have in our state legislature, you know, those are things that really affect quality of life for all of us. And so I am always very appreciative of your very inclusive approach to moving things forward for people. And so thank you for that, and thank you for talking about that. I want to welcome and thank Jill and Derek, our ASL interpreters who are here, and Michael has provided some instructions again in the chat box for accessing captions by using the closed caption button at the bottom of the page for those who need that. That's available as well. So, so as we get started, for those who don't know, could one or both of you talk a little bit about what the Equal Rights Commission is, what the mission of the commission is, and what its role is in Milwaukee and city government?
Well, I think maybe we could both share a little bit, but I'll just put it into context. The City of Milwaukee Equal Rights Commission began as a mayor's initiative back in 1944, and we just celebrated 75 years. That's as long as the United Nations. So that just speaks well and bodes well for Milwaukee. Not to say that we have a lot of work to do, and then we're not perfect, and there is deep divides here in the city that we need to remedy and we need to work on. But to have a committee that evolved over time with different iterations, whether it was the Housing Commission and then the Fair Housing Commission, and then the Equal Rights Commission, does speak volumes that a city has invested in a group and an organization to move and advance equity and equality forward in some capacity. We recently finished a strategic planning mission and reworded our mission, and it's to promote and protect equality, equity, and human rights through education, enforcement, and community engagement. So as you can see, the pieces there. Education, I think, is most important, and that's what we're doing right here, right now, and that is talking to members of our community, listening to members of our community, informing everyone as a whole, whether it's a business or anybody who interacts with people. And obviously, if you know, for some, if the education doesn't ring, then maybe we have to move to enforcement, and that is if there is some kind of complaint or discrimination based on housing or public accommodations or employment in the city, then we can move and help to adjudicate or in some way find a resolution or a remedy for the individuals involved. And again, if it goes back, the final and the third part, again, is community engagement, and that is engaging the community. And I can't emphasize it's a two-way engagement. It's not only us engaging, but we want the community to engage. We want things to come up organically. We want to hear from the community and find out where we can do the best work. And Nathan?
I'd like to sort of echo 2 points in that, Tony. One is that new mission statement. So we just went through a year-long strategic planning process, and that new mission statement includes the word equity, which was one that I think had, excuse me, my dog is barking. That equity word was very important to me, to get that word into our mission statement, because it's not necessarily the most prevalent word in the chapter of city ordinance that enables our commission to exist. So equity, to me, you know, is more than, it's something different than equality, and it paves the way to thinking about how do we direct resources at the city level to lift up communities that have historically not been able to be lifted up. the second point I would like to echo on what Tony said is that community engagement part is really, really critical to what we're doing. Through strategic planning, we have set a certain number of priorities and mission areas to undertake over the next year. And one of those I know we're going to talk about a little bit, I hope we do, which is this enforcement, our enforcement ability to enforce the city's equity and equality laws. But we really need, and it's so challenging right now in the coronavirus milieu, to hear what's important to people, which is why I was so excited to be asked to participate today. I'm hoping we have some good give and take so we can understand what's important to the people, to our neighbors in Milwaukee. What do we want? What do they want us to do? Like I said, we've got a few strategic items to deal with, but I feel like the context is changing rapidly right now with coronavirus and with Black Lives Matter and then the elevation of those issues. The Equal Rights Commission needs to know what's important because we can turn and address the issues that are the critical issues for the moment.
Yeah, thank you both for that. You really shared a lot of information there, and I will really underscore, what I have observed as a sort of institutional partner in working for Forge and previously working for Milwaukee's LGBT Community Center and working closely with the commission and as a resident of Milwaukee. I attend meetings quite frequently of the commission, and I am consistently just really incredibly pleased by how solicitous the commission is, how solicitous the chair, Ches, who's with us here tonight, is of really, really, really asking people in the community to come forward and talk about their experiences and what they need and how the commission can help. I've spent a fair amount of time in local governments across the country, and I don't always see that kind of solicitousness, and so it's very welcome, and I think it's really meaningful. And as you both mentioned, yeah, we would love to have questions and comments, welcome comments as well from folks who are attending here tonight. I failed to say that earlier. You can use the chat box that Michael had us practicing with. And toward the end of the evening, if you would like to raise your hand at that point, we'll open the virtual floor for questionings and comments directly for Nathan and Tony. I'd like to talk, I really want to hear more about where the commission is going, and I think before we get there, for some context, I'd really love to hear both of you share a little bit about some of the recent work the commission has done and some of the progress the city of Milwaukee has made for all communities, but I think particularly as it pertains to LGBTQ and in particular trans and non-binary and gender non-conforming people, because the ERC has really made trans people and our trans communities a priority in a way that I again don't think I've seen in other local government settings. So I'd love to hear if you'd like to share with folks some of the things the commission has done recently.
I would like to just begin by delving into a little bit about where we get our authority. I think that will put things into context. So the city, of course, has ordinances, and those are binding laws and the authority that is given by Common Council for different commissions or boards or anything within the city that's lawful and legal and judicial. And our chapter is called 109. So I invite people to just Google that or go to the milwaukee.gov/ERC, and you'll see that in there, and click on it. And for those that are policy wonks or governmental wonks like me, you'll love to see it and see the protections and see what authority is given to the RC. So our protections are in housing, public accommodations, and employment. And then there are protected classes within the chapter 109, and those protected classes include anywhere from veterans to HIV status, or speaking more here to gender expression and gender identity, which have been included because we didn't find that those protections were in our federal laws and codes, or whether it's been codified in the state. Of course, there's court rulings, and we could speak to that all night long. Things go back and forth. But we wanted to ensure our communities here that the law was the law, and there was no question. It wasn't a matter of going to a court or some other kind of remedy or means. We wanted to tell the community and speak loudly and proudly that we protect people no matter their gender identity, and whether it's gender expression or HIV status. Those protections weren't out there, but they are here, and we will protect people. We have a complaint process, which we may be able to get into as well, but that gives you some kind of framework. The Chapter 109 is our authority to protect and make sure that we don't see discrimination here in Milwaukee. And it does affect a myriad of different policies. But Nathan, I'm just gonna.
Yeah, so I should explain that those three areas: housing, employment, and then public accommodation. Public accommodation means any place where the public is welcomed in the city cannot discriminate against any people based on the classes that are outlined in Chapter 109. So source of income, as long as it's a legal source of income, race, gender identity or expression, a big and nice list. And the thing, when I came out of the ERC, and I hadn't read until I started researching it a little bit, I hadn't read Chapter 109, but the preamble material in that bit of the Milwaukee City Ordinance is really quite heartening to me, because it describes a vision of a Milwaukee that is completely free from discrimination. And for me, that's where we're going. That's where we hope to go. And we know that there's no shortage of injustices to deal with. But at least we have in writing these words that say we're a Milwaukee that will have no discrimination in it. And for me, that's why I wanted to be part of the whole thing. And then so our big to talk about what we're working on now. This adjudication process, this complaint process is the big one. I mean, we've been enabled to do it, but we did not have a policy or procedure or really the capacity to do that. If someone feels they have been discriminated against, they can now make an official complaint to the Equal Rights Commission, and we can investigate and adjudicate that, and in some cases levy remedies. So that's a big one, and we're working on it now, and we're trying to work with our partners in the state and the county and the federal government to do this in an efficient way. We haven't done it before, and we want to get it right. So we've been really working to lay out a process that will hopefully be more or less airtight, and will allow us to do this in a way that's both fair to everybody, but also legally sound, in a way that will stand. The other big initiative for me that I'm working on is the inclusive restrooms, and this was something that has really been an extraordinary experience for me. And it started from listening to our neighbors in the city of Milwaukee, came to the Equal Rights Commission, and people from the trans community and elsewhere said, we have a problem with restrooms in the city hall complex and in buildings owned by the city. There are places where we don't feel safe, places where we don't feel comfortable, places where we feel discriminated against. And I have to say that for me, that was an eye-opening moment, that testimony, because we talk about white privilege and all the sorts of privilege, and I come from a place of privilege, and it was something that I had never had to think about before. That there may be places in the city hall, in our own city municipal buildings, where my neighbors didn't feel comfortable. So the Equal Rights Commission took on a challenge, I would say, and we formed a committee. Our chair formed a committee, an ad hoc committee called the Inclusive Restroom Working Group. I'm leading that committee with another commissioner and members of the community, and members and people from the city. Shelley has been an incredible partner on that committee. And we are about to, we developed recommendations from the committee. We took them to the Common Council, to the Public Works Committee. So we need to create restrooms that are safe for everybody, that are inclusive for everybody, that are not specific to any gender, sex, or gender expression or sex identity. And they came back to us and said, well, develop a policy statement for the city. And that's what we've been working on now. And that policy statement, I've been working on it this week with Shelley. I think we're about ready to send it back to the Common Council. And if all goes well, and I hope it does, we will be able to convert all single stall restrooms in all city-owned and operated buildings over a relatively short period of time to non-gender specific restrooms. And then our goal after that is to move that to all single stall restrooms in any place of public accommodation anywhere in the city. So in any restaurant or bar or any place where anybody can go, that all restrooms that have just one toilet and one sink will be available to anyone, regardless of any. And then hopefully we'll be working on that eventually toward multi-stall restrooms as well, which is a little bit more complicated. One of the things I learned from all of this is you think it's pretty easy to change signs on our restrooms. It's not easy. There's all sorts of laws and codes, and not to mention the lack of education and lack of understanding. So we're trying to take all of this on, and I think we've found some ways to do that. So hopefully, relatively soon, and I say relatively soon in terms of the way city government moves, which is, maybe over the course of a year, we should be able to at least have all city-owned and operated buildings have inclusive restrooms.
Yeah, I thank you for that, Nathan, and for introducing a lot of us to this initiative. I have been just so incredibly overwhelmed by how supportive and how progressive the Equal Rights Commission has been, and how invested you all have been in moving this process forward. And I think it's a process that, again, as we talk about the machinery of local government, that is moving pretty quickly. And I don't want us to gloss over the fact that, as you described, Nathan, we are the ERC is working right now under the direction of the Common Council, which gave the ERC the authorization and the directive to go ahead and develop a policy that would implement inclusive restrooms in city-owned and operated buildings. And that, that's the point that we're at right now, is getting ready to go back to them with a policy on paper and say to them, let's work together to figure out how to implement this. And I have no hesitation at all in saying that I have heard Mayor Barrett on more than one occasion very publicly say that inclusive restrooms are coming to Milwaukee. And so I, for one, feel very optimistic about this initiative moving forward, and starting with city buildings. And then, as you said, Nathan, hopefully at some point, expanding to a citywide ordinance, meaning that restrooms in all places of public accommodation would be inclusive, which I think is just an incredible quality of life issue, not only for trans people, as we know, and as we've discussed in this process, but for, anybody, folks who use assistive devices, folks who need to get into restrooms with families or with personal assistance. So there's great benefit, I think, throughout the community to this. Can you talk a little bit, Nathan, about, one of the things we've discussed in implementing this policy is, how does the policy get implemented? And, you and Tony have both talked about public education already tonight. So what vision does the ERC have in terms of bringing some education both within the city and to the public as we move to implement inclusive restroom policies?
Yeah, it's an interesting and tough question. I mean, we've got to do some education inside City Hall, right? And have done that. I mean, what I was trying to do when we built this committee was to get the buy-in early from the people who are going to actually be the implementers. So we worked with the Department of Public Works and the people who run the buildings in the city. We worked with the Department of Neighborhood Services, which are the people who administer the way the building codes and plumbing codes are enforced. We worked with the Department of Administration to build that administrative buy-in. So there's some education that's happened on that level among these city staff folks who have been working with us to determine how we can implement this. We're working on the next step is education across members of the Common Council and the people who are going to have to say, yes, this is the right policy for Milwaukee. And we're going to reach out one-on-one with key alder people, all the members of the Public Works Committee, and people that we are thinking could be and will be allies in this. I mean, what I would love to get is like Tony had in down south in South Carolina. I would love to have a unanimous adoption of this. I don't know if that's possible, but a person can dream, I suppose. And then our working group is going back and forth a little bit about whose responsibility it's going to be. Ultimately, it is a matter of changing signage on these restrooms as far as implementation goes. But clearly, we're going to want to make sure that everyone understands why there are benefits to having that signage change. Everyone who has to use these restrooms, because I'm talking about restrooms, that are used by staff as well as those that are open to the public. But I mean, literally every single stall restroom in any building owned by the city of Milwaukee. So we're going to work a little bit on some kind of basic understanding and charge the Department of Administration and Public Works with making sure the word gets out in a way that's effective. I'm not sure exactly how that's going to work, and it's unclear at this point whose responsibility it's going to be to develop that those educational materials. Although I will make sure, as to the best of my ability, that our working group has a hand in that. One of the nice things, and like I've said earlier, one of the things that's been interesting for me is that I've really learned a lot, and learned a lot about language in this process, a lot about the sort of visual cues, and all of the ways that our sort of prejudice is encoded right in the built environment, historic prejudice, I should say, and I want to be able to pass that along. I mean, just a really basic understanding of how we've encoded gender, into this simple thing, and how what a disservice that does to some members of our community, to some of our neighbors. So, Shelley, I wish I could give you a more specific answer about how we're going to do this education, because I don't really know yet, but we'll be working on it. And I will take any advice we can get from anybody we can get it from. So.
Great. No, I appreciate that, Nathan, and I didn't mean to put you on the spot or ask for details that I know we don't have yet. But as you and I have discussed, and Tony will remember, in 2018, the Equal Rights Commission held a listening session with members of the trans and non-binary community in Milwaukee. We had almost 100 people at the LGBT Community Center, and we're talking about some of these developments, which back then were still perhaps a bit of a pipe dream, even just 2 years ago. And certainly one of the things we heard is the import from the community of educating the rest of our siblings in the community about these issues, about access to restrooms, and about why and how it's important and who it's important for. So I've appreciated very much that the working group is focused on this, and the ERC is focused on the public education aspect as well. And I don't exactly want to take us backward, but I would like to give you an opportunity, and Tony, as someone who's been on the commission a bit longer, may have a little more perspective on this, but I'd really like to give you an opportunity, Tony, to talk about some of the accomplishments the ERC has made already in even just the last couple of years that have been so beneficial to trans communities in Milwaukee.
Sure, thank you. And I did want to mention something off the last statement as well, or the last subject matter, is that we also have an incredible ally in our President of Common Council, President Johnson, who has advocated for this. So we're lucky to have him as now the new president, and I'm sure he's gonna help move this along. But keep in mind that it's going to be a community effort. It's going to be an effort from everyone coming on board to move this through and contacting your alders, and each one of you are influencers out there. So that's going to be part of the education. And I also wanted to mention that the new ERC, as we've developed it, has a compliance and enforcement committee, which is going to be dealing with those things. A communications committee, which Nathan chairs. We have a governance committee, which I chair. But importantly, there's an outreach and an education committee, which I've served on since the beginning, even before the newer ERC, and had the privilege of chairing, and that's so vital and so important, is the outreach and education. But you know what? All of you tuning in today, and those that tune into this are part of this outreach and a part of this education. But we've been able, because of everybody and working with partners and groups, we've been able to accomplish things from the standard operating procedures with the Milwaukee Police Department regarding our TIGN communities, and how we approach people, and how to train officers. And we're fortunate that we have a liaison with the City Police Department, which also came about from work with the ERC through the Human Rights Campaign Municipal Equality Index, which requires, in order to get a 100% score, which we do have and maintain, we must have a liaison in the police department and the mayor's office. So we've been able to do that work, and I will tell you this, and Shelley, again, you know that well, that work with the standard operating procedures. We went through a lot, and it got a little stuck here and there. But you know what? We called the people to the commission, had a hearing, and got it moving and got it done. And now we have to find out. We have to go back and look at the accountability and how that standard operating procedure is working or not working, or how it's been implemented and how impactful it has been. Because collecting data is very important. Some other things, just to run across, we worked with the Sheriff's Department. You and I, Shelley, serve on that committee as well, in advising the Sheriff's Department with policies and procedures as it relates to the LGBTQ+ community. We hope to get that ramped up and going again. We had a new sheriff come in, and that new sheriff was committed to our community, committed to training, committed to making positive, inclusive policies within a department that was in shambles under the previous sheriff. So fortunately and hopefully we'll get that moving again. We're also working with the health department. As you remember, we started with a group there with the conversion therapy ban. Okay, when you pass an ordinance, that's fine and good, but you just can't leave it. You've got to figure out how to implement it. And the health department came to us in a group, and we formulated a group, and hopefully we'll be able to continue to move that forward. Obviously, the health department is extremely busy right now with some other things, but we intend to call that up and to get that moving again and find out how that will be implemented and what is the impact and how are they going to educate the community. Again, that toolkit needs to be there with everything we do, the education and outreach implementation. The municipal ID was another product of the community coming together and different partners and different organizations. And as you know, the municipal ID is an alternate ID that you can receive with a neutral marker, gender marker. It helps with also folks of different immigration statuses to receive a municipal ID. You can use it for city. I guess you can speak to this, Shelley. Specifically, there are areas within the city you can't use it for voting, but you'll have a city ID that has your marker, your picture, and who you are. So I implore people to get that city ID, that municipal ID. It's also important that we show that the city and we collect that information and the numbers of people that are going to pick that up and use that. I have my municipal ID, and I encourage everybody to get that as well. That's important. But the liaisons and the expanding of the 109, which is our ordinance, was important. But ultimately, with the ERC in our communities, it's about relationships. It's about trust. Right now, I can say that you can count on us. You can count on us. You can trust us. Those on the commission, I'm going to say that. I can speak for my other commissioners. I believe this. I know it's a hard situation for people listening in to have any kind of trust right now, especially on our federal government, where you don't think that you have any remedy, which hardly provides any respect or dignity for individuals, but we, the Equal Rights Commission, do, and our staff. We're committed to doing this. So please come to us. If you feel that you've been discriminated against, or you have been impacted in some way negatively in this city, or whether you live in the city or you work in this city, or it happened to you while you were visiting the city, please go to our website, milwaukee.gov/ERC, and there's a complaint form there. We want to also collect that data. We want to be able to formulate our policies and show Common Council and show those policymakers that there is discrimination here, because a lot of times it's sight unseen. Oh, there's no discrimination here. We don't see any complaints. When you know it exists throughout the city, and we want that data. Even if you're going to the state or the federal government, please submit a complaint form through the city so we can see that and track that. And we're going to be with you. And we promise you that you can trust us. And that's what we're doing more than anything that possibly as a commission is to develop a relationship with all of our friends and neighbors. And that's so important.
Yeah, I really appreciate hearing you say that, Tony. And, you know, we are in a particularly difficult environment right now. Around, I think, even more than usual, trust of government institutions. In addition to bringing complaints or instances of discrimination or unfair treatment to the commission, what you've addressed this a little bit, but what are some ways that individuals in the community who are interested can learn more about, know about what the commission's doing, when it's doing it, and be involved and contribute to the work of the commission?
I'll let my...
Well, as the current chair of the communications committee, I will say there's a couple of ways. One of the things we're doing right now is building out our committees and looking for community members to get involved. As Tony mentioned, we have 3 committees: communications, compliance and enforcement, and outreach and education. They are staffed each by 2 to 3 commissioners, but we are looking for community members who have interest or expertise or just a desire to participate to join these commissions. And we are building out our website to be able to take applications for that, as well as for commissioners themselves. We have a couple of open positions on the commission now, and we're looking to increase the number of commissioners to, 13, I think is what we're going to go for. We have 11 now and 3 open slots. My dog's about to bark because I see someone's about to walk past. Hold on, with their dog. Hold on, it's going to happen. I would suggest that you start by visiting our website and seeing what's available there. We're working on putting together a regular sort of newsletter. One sec. Talking about sorts, we're going to put together a regular newsletter or some kind of, regularly updated web page to talk about the sorts of initiatives that we're working on. Racism as a public health issue is a big one right now for us. How to work with the city to institutionalize measures of equity when we're talking about how they're budgeting within their departments. This is another big issue that we're going to be working on, how they do hiring in the city. And then finally, we have been and will hopefully soon again be doing regular listening sessions with various communities across the city. I mean, open to anyone. You talked about one, from a year or 2 ago, Shelley. And we're trying to do that around the city. As I said before, there's a lot of people who have a lot of need. There's a lot of people who feel hurt or mistrust. And we really want to be as responsive as possible to the real concerns of our neighbors. And so we need to hear about what people care about and what they want us to work on. We think we know, because we talk to people a lot, but it's changing all the time. And so there are feedback mechanisms on our website. You can come to our commission meetings. They're virtual now, so you can just tune in from wherever you are if you have access to a computer or a phone. And our committee meetings are also open and accessible, and they're all noticed on the city's website. You can go on the city's website and have the notices sent to you by email for whenever we're having a meeting, so you'd be aware. What have I missed, Tony? Oh, our Human Rights Day celebration. That's a good one too. And Tony will talk about that because he organizes it.
The Human Rights Day celebration is an awesome event every year held in December. It's an international event, and we localized it about 3 years ago and brought people from all over different organizations and across communities to celebrate each other, to celebrate our future, to also recognize the work that needs to be done, not only internationally, because remember, this is a global situation of human rights, but what happens here and how it impacts our communities and how we're a part of this global movement. And we hope and invite each one of you and to keep an eye out for it's usually December, the first Saturday in December, but we'll have some more information as we move forward and realizing what we're in today, and it may be virtual this year. So looking forward to that. We invite you to participate. And it's also an opportunity to recognize individuals who have accomplished great things in equity and equality here in this city. And I know that Shelley was an award winner last year. So we're always looking for people to nominate individuals. So please look out for that. That's on our website as well, which I'm going to list right now on the chat box.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. And we have included the ERC's website a few times, thanks to Michael being on the ball. And I also just put in the chat a few minutes ago the link for the city's e-notify system, which for anyone who's interested is probably the easiest and best way to be notified of ERC meetings when they're happening and what the agendas are. And that is true for all commissions, all common council meetings, pretty much any sort of city notice that's required to be given, city and county actually, you can sign up for a subscription via email through that e-notify system. And I really recommend just going in there and taking a look, and you will learn a lot about city government and the structure of city government and what's going on and what people in our government are talking about. I'd like to shift our topic just a little bit. Nathan mentioned the city's initiative around racism, declaring racism as a public health crisis. And Nathan also mentioned a bit ago the sort of historic moment where we're in right now in terms of the movement for Black lives. I'd love to have one or both of you talk a little bit first about the city's initiative around racism as a public health crisis, and then I'd like to, after that, ask you to address one comment that has and question that's come up in the chat box around marginalized folks and their interactions with law enforcement, and what you sort of envision or what you think can be done to improve law enforcement relations with marginalized communities so that we are not causing further harm to people from those communities via those interactions. So I'll let you think about that for a moment and ask you to talk first about racism as a public health crisis.
I can talk briefly about it, Tony, if you give me just a second. I hope I don't say anything wrong. I mean, I haven't been leading this. Our chair, Ches Ordonez, who just left this talk, has been. When we talk about racism as a public health crisis, what's interesting to me is it is the first time where we're talking about not a level playing field, but we're talking about outcomes, measurable outcomes about how do people from certain marginalized communities fare worse across all measures of social and economic health in the city. And in the county in this case. And so for me, this, I mean, I'm an urban planner. You know, we often, you know, sort of work with these sort of outcomes-based forms for making decisions. And we really haven't, you know, in the United States, we haven't done that. We've talked about equality, so-called equality being the level playing field. It's equal opportunity. It's not, well, how do people fare inside of that field? And when we're talking about institutionalized racism or institutionalized discrimination of any kind, obviously there's no such thing as a level playing field. And I'm talking for me now, not anybody else in the Equal Rights Commission. I feel fairly strongly about this. So what I'm hoping we get out of this, treating racism and eventually all discrimination as a public health issue, is that we will be able to collect the sort of data that I think Tony was starting to talk about what those outcomes are. How do people who are in whatever minority community fare worse in terms of their health outcomes, their ability to thrive, their quality of life, and their economic ability to thrive. I don't know that we have a lot of, oops, more barking. This is the worst time of day because everybody who's walking their dog past my house, you know, has to get a bark. I don't know that we know exactly where it's going to go, but we're going to start by getting those data and saying, look, this is real. You know, these negative outcomes are correlated to race, whether it's that interaction with the police, whether it's you know, childhood mortality, life expectancy, lead poisoning, exposure to lead and environmental health hazards. I don't know that we know where it's going to go exactly from there, but it gives us a framework to at least talk about it and institutionalize remedies, and to say whatever decisions the city makes, the common council makes, and the mayor's office makes, can be looked at through this lens of how will it affect those very specific and measurable outcomes that we know are correlated to race and discrimination.
And this seems to me, I certainly am no expert with regard to this initiative in the city, Tony and Nathan, but this seems like a sea change to me in terms of how we approach these issues institutionally and in terms of resource investment and where that goes, and in measuring these outcomes. In talking particularly about the moment that we're in right now, is there a role for ERC in addressing some of the challenges that we have in Milwaukee around law enforcement and some of the interactions, the history of interactions that we know have existed with folks in marginalized communities, and some of which we saw play out, I think, even during the protests. And I understand, you know, you're representing the city to some degree, and understand that may constrain a little bit of what we're able to talk about here tonight, but I'd really appreciate hearing what the ERC's perspective and what the ERC thinks its role is in addressing some of these very specific challenges.
Well, I can speak to this a bit. Obviously, we've come about a pandemic within a pandemic, and we know that this particular pandemic you're talking about has been going on for 400 plus years. It's this institutional white supremacy exists through every part, every institution, every business, every agency, every department, and there's no one that can deny that. I spoke about the Equal Rights Commission and its history of 75 years, and that's a hallmark. That's a milestone. But I also recognize the fact that why does it take a George Floyd, a knee on his neck, in order for us to start having these discussions. I will say that the city began this discussion as far as racism as a public health crisis prior to that happening. So there has been some movement forward, and prior to this. But then it's always a reactive situation. So I say to the city and as we move forward, and to invest in equality, in equity, and we have been talking with the city about creating those necessary investments in order to start a proactive approach to these situations and to be able to mitigate these situations, but in order to dismantle the racism that exists. So with this particular ordinance as a public health crisis, it further allows the Equal Rights Commission, which has some authority to require city departments to provide annual reports. But this is a mechanism to hold departments accountable. It's a mechanism to make them look with a racial equity lens at everything they do, every dollar you spend, every decision you make. How does that impact our communities of color, and how does it work to dismantle the systemic racism that exists? So this is an opportunity for, and it's unfortunate that it takes something like this in order to elevate our work. But this is the moment, and if we don't do it, then we're not doing justice to all of our communities. If the city doesn't do it, it's not doing justice. So I think more than ever, this commission is dedicated and committed to making these changes. We understand that it's systemic. So what is that? Institutional. What does that tell you? That to dismantle something like that is overwhelming, and it can't be done overnight. And it's not like flipping a switch. But they do realize that they're going to have to do something about it, and we're going to be holding people accountable. We're going to be holding departments accountable. There are going to be more measures in place to hold it, to create those outcomes and deliverables, as Nathan is talking about. And we're going to also ask the community to be involved in moving this forward. It's in ordinance and it is written. So most recently, out of what has taken place, we had the minority impact statement out of the Common Council. So this is sort of basically the same thing. It's a lens. So any one of the committees of Common Council can say, hey, have you looked at this decision in your department, or as we create an ordinance, has it been scrubbed for equity, equality, and has that racial lens been put on there, or has the lens of that equity and equality lens been put on there? So I know there were certain sectors, and right off, of course, we noticed that LGBTQ people were not included in the original ordinance, and we, as commissioners, and I know I worked with our chair, Ches Ordonez, and I rallied community and got a hold of every member of Common Council, for that matter, and implored upon them, including the authors, that LGBTQ people be included. They were using the criteria based on the federal government of those specific classes, but again, we tend to use those same things. Again, it's a systemic, even when we're trying to correct some racial inequities and some inequities, we're using some of the same standards, and that left us out. And we were included. And actually, Jocasta Zamaripa, our alderperson, who is an LGBTQ alderperson, the first LGBTQ alderperson, brought that up in committee, and was summarily dismissed. And that's when we were able to come back, and again, we rallied some people in the community, and the commission pushed it forward, and we were able to conclude that. I bring you that story because that just goes to tell you and to show you that there is much work to do. And even today, at the peak of all that's happening, we're still losing sight of communities and individuals.
No, thank you, Tony. And I again, I appreciate so deeply the focus of the Equal Rights Commission, and essentially your grounding in the community, and what the community needs. And, it's an unfortunate sort of turn of events with regard to our new alderperson, Jocasta Zamaripa. But, I think it really does underscore the import of the role, and the impact that the Equal Rights Commission has in this city. Staying on this topic for just a second, I know that the county has also declared racism as a public health crisis. And I guess I'm wondering what sort of interaction there is between the city and the county, and the city's Equal Rights Commission and the county's Human Rights Commission, in terms of partnering to address some of these issues more broadly throughout the county, if that's something you can speak to.
I can. We began conversations with the county's Human Rights Commission some time ago, and it was more working together on the Human Rights Day event, which is important. But we have now connected more so than ever in working on policy and moving policy forward, whether not only within our own constituents, within our jurisdictions, but how can we work together with other equal rights commissions, human rights commissions throughout the state, and form some kind of ad hoc group to move things forward on a state level in order to provide greater protections, because there is more authority, on a state level. Plus, it's more impactful. And we're not about keeping things here at home. Our whole purpose is hopefully put ourselves out of business. We'd love to have a day where there's not an Equal Rights Commission and there's no need, but that's a long way. And but so we need to work together, and we form this group, and we've been working now more than ever in providing statements and show that we are collaborating and that we're united on this front. And we're working on several things that we're going to be rolling out very soon. We've also had conversations with the state Equal Rights Division on how we can better collaborate to protect people here in Milwaukee using state law, existing state law. And we found that, the state will hear cases regarding gender identity and gender expression, and something that's not necessarily written exactly into the law, but because, and you could speak probably more and better to this, but the word sex has been interpreted by that division and that department to include gender identity and gender expression. But let me just say, until you codify something, it's based on an interpretation of a particular administration. So, and people should not be subject to administration changes in court and whims, and who knows, these days with this particular Supreme Court in the state of Wisconsin, where they're just moving. I mean, I don't know if they understand the word or the definition of precedent, and that might be existing in a lot of different courts, and that's unfortunate and that's sad. And that's sad for individuals to have to be subject to those types of whims. But that's why we need laws that are codified. And I know that we have some members of the legislature working toward that. But as we work together with different organizations and groups, equality groups and human rights groups, we're trying to press those things forward.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. I'll bring us back around, I think, maybe to the recent Supreme Court decision in just a moment, but there's a question that I think kind of follows a little bit on some of the last statements you just made, or as we're talking about racism, talking about other inequities, talking about challenges between institutional interactions with people in marginalized communities. We know that none of us exists in a bubble. We all have various aspects of our identities, and as we approach things, looking at justice issues and equity issues. I guess I'm wondering how the Equal Rights Commission has looked at or thought about the intersections of identities and how that can amplify some of these challenges for folks. for instance, racism and how it intersects with, individuals who are trans as well.
Well, go ahead, Tony.
Well, I think at this point we've been seeing the intersection of communities, and especially with our Black trans neighbors and friends who have been in the forefront of this movement, and bringing a light to what's going on. And it's a situation where if we're not there for each other, and then we're not allowing, for example, for our Black trans neighbors and friends to take the lead here and to move this forward, and to create those opportunities and make sure that they're on the stage and we're not necessarily on the stage. And I do want to just point this out as well, that yeah, we're a couple of white cisgender males here representing today, but our commission is diverse and inclusive, and we're always trying to move that and to make it more inclusive. But I realize that, I see that, and so every day we need to put on those lenses and look at that and make sure that we're empowering all parts of our communities, and especially our communities of color, which need to be taking the lead here, and that we need to be listening, because I always say the words silent and listen have all all the same letters, and there's a reason for that. And I think now more than ever we need to be doing that.
I just have to say that that's the sort of intersectionality. Those questions are ones that I've been sort of thinking about. I mean, not in any structured way. I mean, our code does not address the sort of, I think the word magnification was used, the magnification of discrimination when we're talking about people who are perhaps fall under more than one of our protected categories. I wish we didn't have to use that word either. But I don't know. I mean, maybe we could get some leadership from people who, like Tony said, let's let people who are affected this way lead the discussion, rather than people like Tony and me leading it. How should that be addressed? I don't know. I would love to learn about that more and learn how to talk about that in a way that is that we can help tell the stories to the places where it has to be told. Not tell the stories, but make it possible for the stories to be told, let me say.
Nathan, that reminds me of our Human Rights Day event each year. And when we did start that, and I think it was 3 or 4 years ago. Time, it's hard for me to keep up with time, especially these days. But we decided after the first year that it would be a storytelling time where people would come up and tell their stories, so that we could really hear it from the individuals and what they've experienced. And that was a way for us to gauge. And, as we move forward, and we've had those listening sessions that I think were critical, but maybe, and we might have it, change it and make it a little bit different, where the commission is not sitting up there in a dais and we're listening to a crowd and they come up and step up with microphones, but instead, why not we'll be in the crowd, in the audience, and let them lead it in the front, and then we can listen and take the notes and then see how we can work together. I think there are ways, and I think we're finding those ways. And I think today is a good example where, yeah, we've been panelists, but we're also able to have another organization, another group moderate a session. But I'm looking forward maybe for the 2.0 of this, Shelley, and I know I'm pitching this out to you, is whether Forge would want to move this forward and create something where the commissioners could sit and listen, and then have individuals who now today are on the other side here actually would become the panelists, and you have that serious discussion, and then we would have commissioners and maybe even older people listening in.
Yeah, I would like to move that forward, and we've talked about that in the Inclusive Restroom work group. That the commission itself needs some education, and just to hear some differing points of view, and to hear about I guess was talking about the sorts of language that people want to be. I mean, I want to be able to not stand in for my trans neighbors, but I want to be able to stand with them, and make sure that things are done in ways that are respectful, and that the language we use is respectful. And it's a learning curve. It's a learning curve for everyone, for me and for our elected officials as well.
Well, and you know, my impression of the membership of the ERC is that the vast majority, if not all, of the commissioners, in my experience, reflect that the perspective that you two have shared, and that your responsibility to the diversity of the communities in Milwaukee is paramount, and that you so much welcome the perspective of community members, and hearing that and elevating those voices and those needs. And so I will express appreciation for the work that you have done, and we look forward to collaborating going forward. And as you said, and as Laureen noted in the chat box just a moment ago, that we did have what I think was a very successful listening session with a very large group of trans individuals, and frankly the largest group of trans individuals that outside maybe our Transgender Day of Remembrance events that I've seen gathered in Milwaukee. And so I deeply appreciated your presence there, and the work that has come out of that very directly in the ERC. I'd like to just take a real quick moment, and we're at 7:15, and so probably moving toward wrapping up a little bit. I'd like to ask folks who would like to make comments or ask questions of Nathan and Tony to please feel free to do so in the chat box, and or to use the raise hand feature, or signal to us some way that you'd like to ask a question or make a comment directly to Nathan and Tony, and we'll unmute you when we get to that point and have you do that. There's a question in the chat box, and I want to sort of use this to just talk briefly about the recent Supreme Court case in the Bostock and Zarda and Stevens cases, which the consolidated decision from the Supreme Court affirmed that our federal non-discrimination law in employment certainly protects individuals who are who identify as trans, well, I should say this correctly, that discrimination based on gender identity or expression or sexual orientation is prohibited by our existing federal laws. And Tony, you touched on the fact that that is how our state law is interpreted as well, even though gender identity is not included in the actual text of that state law. And I'm going to try, I'll see how artfully I can do this, to tie this into a question that's in the chat box about our local government, and specifically the Common Council. And I'd like to ask you, how you sort of perceive the understandings and the level of knowledge and the attitudes about trans and non-binary people in our local government, and where you think some improvement is needed, and whether developments on a federal level like the Bostock decision have any real effect in our government institutions, and whether they work toward helping increase equity for communities like ours. I hope that's not too long or loaded a question.
It's pretty loaded, I would say. Here's we don't work for the city, right? We're volunteers, and what I see is us. The ERC represents everyone who lives or works or visits Milwaukee, and the assumption I make when dealing with the Alder people, and it's always, it's not my thing. I'm not good at it. I'm not a politician, but I assume that maybe they're at the place I started with at a year or two ago, as far as not only having no understanding of trans issues particularly, but never really having been privileged not to have to think about it. And that's where I think probably many people in general in Milwaukee, and certainly that would include our alder people, there's an arc of understanding that we can help. Hopefully the ERC can help get the ball rolling about what these issues are, how they affect real people, how they negatively affect quality of life for our neighbors. And I'm sure that our older people want the best quality of life for Milwaukeeans. That's what they want, and that's why they're there. And that's the assumption that I start with. But it goes back to your question earlier, Shelley. There's some education that needs to be done about why this is important, why it is firmly in right down the middle of our own equal rights ordinance, to extend these protections to everyone who's discriminated against. So that's as politically as I can answer that question, I think.
I'll just add that I think that Title VII ruling by the Supreme Court is momentous. I think it's going to be impactful. Simply, I think by the margin itself in the Supreme Court, and for the individuals who voted in favor of it, it has a lot to do with it. It says a lot. It says a lot that even the court, I think the court is an example and is a reflection of the United States and everyone here as it begins to move and reflects. And it took a long time for marriage equality, and it's taken a long time for the Title VII ruling. But I see us going in the right way. But I also wonder, and we all wonder in our communities, why in the hell do we have to wait for the Supreme Court to rule? Why has it taken this long? Why do we need to keep fighting for our rights and going to court? Why do we need to keep fighting an administration wants to change rules and regs in administrations, and constantly doing that with housing and urban development, or whether health and human services? So it's going to take, again, a long time, and it takes a long time. But anecdotally, I will say this, and I've worked with Common Council on several different pieces, including the conversion therapy ban, and I've worked with individuals there, and I've worked with all of them, and I will say that education has improved. Understanding, it's not where it needs to be. I know that some have come to me who voted against the conversion therapy ban and apologized, but they know that they had to come up. I was standing there, and they walked right up to me, and I said, while I appreciate that apology, you shouldn't apologize to me. You need to apologize to everybody else that's impacted. And it really is painful, and it really hurts, because what people need to understand more than anything, it's the messaging. Messaging is like, negative messages are like cuts. And it begins to cut people and cut people and cut people, and they hurt and they bleed. And eventually, they don't survive. And if people would just put this in the back of their mind, that everything they do and everything they say has an impact on a human life and a human being out there. And once they realize that, then they'll think about why it's important to protect our trans communities, our intersex communities, our gender non-conforming communities, and why their lives matter, and why their lives are so important, and why we need to give them the dignity as every human being. But you know what? Just like Nathan said, some of them are not there yet. But what we're going to do with everybody listening here today, and as a community, we're going to continue to keep changing their minds and keep educating people and holding people accountable. And I will hold people accountable. And I will tell them. And You kind of know it whenever they vote, they cast their vote, and they walk over to you and start apologizing. Something is making sense, but we need to take it a step further. Thanks.
Thank you, Tony. That's really, I think, really profound and a really lovely message and a nice way to begin to close out our evening. And, you know, I think some of what you just said is what we know about the old sort of phrase that representation matters. And you've done a great deal for our entire LGBTQ community in the very short time that you've been a commissioner on the ERC for about 4 years. And your presence is greatly appreciated and has a great impact. And, you know, Nathan, we talk about allyship. And, you know, when we talk about allyship, we talk about more than, you know, good feelings. We talk about people who dig in and do the work. And that is what you are doing, what I've seen you do in the last year or two that I've had the privilege of getting to know you. And so I thank you as well for all of your work on behalf of our communities. I'd like to have us wrap up, and I guess I'll just leave it to either of you if there's anything you'd like to say before we close out here this evening.
I just want to echo real quick about Nathan's work on the bathroom and task force. Not only have you put so much time into it, but you put so much thought in the entire group and that entire committee, and the way you've approached it, and it's so professionally and strategically done and informative that I think it's probably some of the best work I've seen done in the city by far, and I'm including every council.
Thanks.
And I really appreciate that. The value of that work is incredible. Thanks for that.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that, and I've got a great, I have a really great committee, and as I've said from the beginning, for me, it's been a learning process, and I really just want to bring it home now. So hopefully that's going to happen. You know, so for me to close out, I cannot top what Tony said in his last speech. That's why Tony's the vice chair. And you know, for me, it's just such a privilege to be asked to do this, to serve on this committee. I have learned so much from so many people. I've learned about the lives of people with disabilities. I've learned about the lives of trans people. I've learned about the lives of racial minorities, of people of low and moderate incomes, and the sorts of challenges they face. And it's been really moving. And what I'm hoping is that, you know, we talk about telling these stories in this education. What I would love to do is see a place where we, the city, makes these decisions because it's just because it's the right thing to do, not because we have to hear about, you know, the traumas and the trauma porn and that kind of stuff. That, you know, sometimes we need to get those stories out there to sort of break down some of those walls. I just want to see the city do it because it's right. And we've got some examples in a few other cities that are starting to think that way. Oakland, California is a big one, as far as how they're institutionalizing institutionalizing equity and, in fact, reparations in the way they allocate resources and funding across their city. And that's where I'm hoping someplace like that we can go. Detroit's doing the same thing, Philadelphia to some extent. So I want Milwaukee to be the city that people think about when they think about equity and how it can be done right. So
Great.
All of your help, please join our committees. Everybody who's listening, come and help us out, because we need the voices. We need everybody's voice. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Nathan. Thank you, Nathan and Tony, again, really, for being here. I think that was a really enlightening and important discussion, and just really appreciate both of you being here with us today. So as we close out very quickly, we're on our time, and as always, for those of you who are participating, there will be an evaluation for tonight's session that'll pop up in your internet browser, and we look at those and appreciate your input and your feedback very much. So if you have a moment to do that, we'd appreciate you filling those out. And the last thing I'll do before we close out for the evening is let you know about some of our upcoming sessions in this programming series. August 11th, which I think is a Tuesday, next Tuesday, we will have Dr. Andy Petrol back here and talking about PrEP and sex and hooking up and how we can do that in the age of COVID. And looks like the next, looks like our schedule isn't quite filled out yet, but August 25th, we'll have the continuation of Annie Lakatosh's series on hormones. And she'll be talking about transmasculine hormones, and those sessions are open to everyone. We'll have another writing workshop that we've got scheduled on the 10th, and again, we'll fill out the 10th of September. Our schedule will get filled out in the meantime. And I'll just mention that Annie will have her third in the series of hormone use on September 22nd for non-binary folks, and how non-binary folks can use hormone therapy to affirm their identities. So we welcome everyone to all of those. Thank you again to Nathan and Tony from the Equal Rights Commission, and thank you to both of our interpreters for your work tonight. I see that one of you is not Derek, as I had indicated earlier, so thank you both for being here. Thank you, Jill. Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you all. It was a pleasure as usual. Have a good night.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. I really appreciate this opportunity.
Thank you, Nathan.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tony.
Take care.
Thank you.